The heart monitor went from calm beeps to a furious rhythm when the woman in the powder blue visor reached over the pre-op cart and flicked a switch. "We are pausing this until he pays his lawn fine," she announced, touching a sterile cable like it was a light dimmer. The surgeon's head snapped up with a look of absolute disbelief. "Ma'am, step away from the equipment immediately. I am the HOA president," she said with a tone that suggested this explained everything and granted her unlimited authority over the universe. "Fantastic," the doctor replied, already reaching for the phone on the wall. "Enjoy explaining that to the police. My name is Nolan Pierce, and I am a homeowner at Cedarbrook Landing, where every mailbox is beige, and the bylaws seem to breed in the dark like some kind of suburban nightmare. I keep to myself with my quiet accounting job, my quiet power tools, and my quiet kid. My 8-year-old son, Evan, needed sudden, time-sensitive surgery for an appendix that decided to throw a tantrum at the worst possible moment. We were loading him into the car at 6 o'clock in the morning, trying to stay calm despite his pain and my absolute terror when Loretta Pike materialized on my driveway with a clipboard, clutched like a holy relic. "Ambulances cannot stage on cul-de-sacs," she said, gesturing to my driveway like a TSA agent with a personal vendetta against common decency. "That is my car," I said, as calmly as I could manage, while my son groaned in pain in the back seat, "and my son needs to get to the hospital right now." She frowned at the temporary wooden ramp I had laid over the curb to make it easier to get Evan into the vehicle without jostling him too much. "Unapproved exterior modification," she said, making a note on her clipboard with the kind of satisfaction most people reserve for winning the lottery. "This will be a $200 fine, and I will need you to remove it within 24 hours or face additional daily penalties." It all started earlier that week when I put a small yard sign out front that read, "Keep Evan Strong," in simple blue letters. My sister had made it, and honestly, it gave Evan a little boost every time he saw it. Loretta cited me within 2 hours for unsanctioned messaging that violated the community aesthetic standards outlined in Section 12, Subsection 4, Paragraph 9 of the Covenant. She left the citation tucked into my screen door with a smiley-faced sticker on it, which somehow made it even worse. Then she dinged me for the cooler on my front porch, calling it medically themed clutter, even though it just held popsicles for Evan's sore throat. She took 3 photographs from different angles, like she was documenting a crime scene. She threatened a $500 fine when the visiting nurse parked nose in instead of parallel to community harmony, which apparently is a thing you can violate. The nurse, a kind woman named Patricia, apologized to me and said she had never heard of such nonsense in 20 years of home health care. The morning of the surgery, Loretta blocked my car with her golf cart and announced the need for a safety review. She measured my reflective house numbers with a tape measure, declaring them 1, 4, and 2 large. She photographed my garbage cans from 3 different angles, noting that the lids were facing north-northwest instead of due north as required. She informed me that any urgent egress required a 72-hour architectural request submitted in triplicate with a $50 processing fee. I told her my son had appendicitis and we needed to leave immediately. She said medical emergencies were not listed as exemptions in the architectural review process, and that failure to plan ahead was not the association's problem. My neighbor, Mrs. Duca, stepped outside, took one look at the situation, and said in her thick Brooklyn accent, "Loretta, move your scooter, or I will move you myself, and you will not like my method." Loretta moved the golf cart, but not far, parking it sideways across the street like a passive-aggressive roadblock. She followed us in her SUV with her hazard lights blinking like we were some kind of funeral procession for common sense. Every time I check my rear-view mirror, there she was, visor gleaming in the morning sun, phone pressed to her ear, probably alerting the entire HOA board that I was attempting to leave the neighborhood without proper documentation. At one red light, she actually pulled up next to me and made a writing gesture, pointing at her clipboard and mouthing the words, "This is not over." At the hospital, I signed what felt like 47 forms, while Evan squeezed my hand so hard I thought my fingers might break. He was being so brave, trying not to cry, even though I could see the pain in his eyes and the fear behind it. The admissions nurse was efficient and kind, moving us through quickly. Then Loretta marched straight to the admissions desk like she owned the place, cutting in front of an elderly man with a walker. "This patient resides in Cedarbrook Landing and is currently out of compliance with multiple covenant violations," she told the registrar as if she were reading off a parking ticket instead of talking about my sick child. "He owes approximately $1,400 in fines and penalties, and I cannot, in good conscience, allow community resources to be utilized until this matter is resolved." The registrar, a young man with glasses and infinite patience, blinked slowly, clearly trying to process what he was hearing. "Ma'am, this is a hospital, not a homeowners association meeting. We treat patients based on medical need, not their lawn maintenance status." Loretta made a pouty face that would have been funny if the situation were not so serious, then pushed past the sign that clearly said "Authorized personnel only" in bold red letters. She marched into the pre-op area, muttering something about community liability and her responsibility to the neighborhood and how people think they can just ignore the rules whenever it suits them. I tried to follow, but a nurse gently stopped me, explaining they were prepping Evan and I would be called back in just a moment. Through the window, I could see them getting him situated, checking his vitals, explaining what would happen next. Then I watched in horror as Loretta leaned over the rolling tower of monitors next to my son's bed. She poked at a cable with one manicured finger and stated loudly that she was indefinitely postponing any incision, pending payment of outstanding fees and submission of proper emergency egress documentation. That is when Dr. Chen, a calm woman with kind eyes that suddenly looked like power tools ready to drill through nonsense, hit the call button on the wall. "Security to pre-op 3 immediately," she said with deadly calm, and someone dispatch PD. "We have an unauthorized individual interfering with patient care." Security arrived first. Two large men in navy blue uniforms who looked like they had seen everything, but were still genuinely surprised by this particular situation. Then two police officers walked in, and the entire atmosphere shifted from medical urgency to criminal investigation. Loretta attempted her opening statement with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences before. "I represent the Homeowners Association, and I am here to ensure compliance with community standards." She began clutching her clipboard like a shield. The senior officer, a woman with gray hair, pulled back tight, and zero patience for foolishness, responded flatly. I represent handcuffs, and you are about to get very familiar with them if you do not start explaining why you are in a restricted medical area. Dr. Chen summarized the situation with surgical precision. Unauthorized entry into a sterile area, direct interference with medical treatment of a minor, contamination risk to equipment, attempted obstruction of emergency care, and physical contact with life monitoring systems without authorization or training. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and showed the officers my doorbell camera footage. There was Loretta measuring my curb with a tape measure while we tried to load a sick child into the car. There she was, blocking our vehicle with her golf cart. There she was, following us with her hazard lights on, and there was the crystal clear audio of her announcing she would pause this nonsense at the hospital and ensure compliance before any procedure took place. The hospital's risk manager appeared from nowhere, carrying a policy binder thick enough to stop a bullet. She was a tall woman in a sharp suit who looked like she ate liability lawsuits for breakfast. Anyone touching medical equipment without authorization is guilty of criminal trespass and interference with medical care, she said, flipping to a tab section marked in red. This is a felony in cases involving minors. It is also grounds for a permanent ban from this facility and a civil lawsuit for emotional distress and endangerment. The officers nodded and began asking Loretta the kind of patient, deliberate questions that make guilty people panic. They asked for her identification. They asked why she was in the hospital. They asked if she had any medical training. They asked if she understood what the word unauthorized meant. Each question made her face redder and her voice higher. Loretta tried to pivot to playing the victim, a strategy that had probably worked for her dozens of times before in subdivision disputes. She claimed I had weaponized sympathy for my son to gain favor with neighbors and avoid legitimate fines. She claimed the Keep Evan Strong sign was somehow political and designed to create division in the community. She insisted she was just doing her duty to the community and protecting property values, which apparently trumped a child's medical emergency in her mind. The officer asked her directly, with the kind of clarity that allows no wiggle room, if she had permission to enter the pre-op area. She said, HOA presidents do not need permission to access areas where residents are present with a kind of entitlement that makes normal people's jaws drop. The officer said, You do today, and guided her wrists behind her back with practiced efficiency. The click of the handcuffs was the most beautiful sound I had heard all week. She immediately started sputtering about lawsuits and board meetings, and how this was all a misunderstanding and they were making a terrible mistake. While they walked her out, she kept chanting community standards, like it was a magic spell that had suddenly stopped working. Her visor fell off halfway down the hallway. Dr. Chen turned to Evan, who was watching everything with wide eyes and a confused expression, and said gently, Okay, buddy, let us do this the right way. No more interruptions, I promise. 2 hours later, my kid was in recovery, brave as a lion, and asking for the popsicle I had promised him. The surgery went perfectly. Loretta Pike was charged with criminal trespass, interference with medical treatment of a minor, and reckless endangerment. The district attorney, a stern man who apparently had his own HOA horror stories, made it clear these were serious felony charges that could result in up to 5 years in prison. She was also hit with a restraining order, keeping her 500 feet from the hospital and our home. The judge set her bail at $50,000, and when the bailiff read the amount out loud, Loretta's face went from red to white to a shade of purple I did not know existed on the human color spectrum. She opened her mouth to protest, but her lawyer, looking exhausted and embarrassed to be associated with this case, put a hand on her arm and shook his head firmly. She was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs for the second time in a week. And this time there was no clipboard to hide behind and no visor to shield her from the stares of everyone in the gallery.